Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Could Ted Sirois really create a photograph just by looking at a camera? What's really behind reality? Are animals aware of the multiverse?
Hello, and welcome to the 879th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live and TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those capricious questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and Dad, Paul. And today we bring you an open-line show to answer your questions on pretty much any aspect of the paranormal. If you'd like to join us on the air, you can give us a call, 401-766-1240 from anywhere, or you can email Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com or Shane Sirois at gmail.com. And you can get at us also through any sort of social media platform if you'd like.
Joining us via Skype today is our favorite guest co-host, Shane Sirois. Tally-ho, Shane.
Hey, I hope everyone's doing well out there. And Paul and Ben, how you guys doing?
Yeah, we're doing.
We're doing what we're doing.
We're doing the best we can, and that's about all that we can do.
Right.
That's good.
Okay, well, let's jump right in here. Let's start with an email from Charlie, which I believe I pronounced correctly before because she's written them before.
Oh, really?
From Willow Creek, Oregon.
Alrighty. So, Charlie writes to us, Hi, Paul. I've been wondering where...
Heck with it. Okay.
Well... You know, Dad, you're
No, that's not what I meant. Go ahead.
I was trying to think of a funny joke, and I couldn't think of one. Hi, Paul. I've been wondering where this question came from. It has been rolling around in my brain. There are some book characters that seem so real, I wonder if they really do exist in our multiverse somewhere or somewhen. I think of Sherlock Holmes and Harry Potter especially. Busy today listening to yours and Ben's archived broadcasts. Greetings and felicitations from Eastern Oregon, Charlie.
Well, thank you, Charlie, for writing in. You always send very interesting questions. I think that she has a point there. I remember in some of our Halloween shows, we would end with the idea that if the Great Pumpkin or some figure like that did not exist at some point, somewhere or somewhen in the multiverse, Charles Schulz, the cartoonist of the Peanuts cartoons, would not have thought of it. I don't know if that's correct, but I believe that. So yeah, I think definitely there would be some multiverse connection there. There would be figures like that. Anything that can be conceived, I think, is present somewhere in our subconscious, which is probably our different lives in the multiverse. Now maybe that's snake oil, but I don't think so. What do you fellas think, Shane?
No, I agree, 100%. But I'd like to hear what Ben has to say right here.
Yeah.
Well, I believe in many things. So I don't know. I think of Carl Jung with the idea of archetypes, and that there's with book characters, right? You know, there's certain human characteristics, especially if the book's written very well. You know, it kind of transports us almost to a different world, maybe figuratively or literally. So I wouldn't put it past it, but at the same time, there's a lot of characteristics and parallels that we can draw in our own experiences. And with any sort of media, any sort of media, you're put in the perspective of someone or something in that book, film, TV show, whatever the medium is that you're participating in. So however the story is told, you see through their eyes, you end up kind of aligning yourself, mentally, emotionally with these characters. Perhaps it is that you're sort of tapping into somewhere or someone where you are this person, maybe unintentionally. But at the same time, you have to kind of make the argument that maybe it's just they do seem real because these are character traits that you've experienced or behaviors that you've seen or in some way participated in. Not to say that we've all been the greatest detective in the world and been terrible at violin, but regardless, I would say yes, it's possible, but also we have to kind of maintain an air of, well, we kind of have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, are we identifying with this, or is this a real reality?
Yeah, I think you're right. You've got the implanted memories, things that could certainly result from this, and we make associations in our mind of different things.
Right.
I'm thinking of the Bridie Murphy case. This was a very famous reincarnation case that was talked about a lot in the 50s and 60s. And this person started having all these memories, a woman, of a person named Bridie Murphy. She went under hypnosis, which at the time was considered valid. I mean, still is in many cases. And she turned out, she said she was the reincarnation of this Irish woman, Bridie Murphy, well, further research much later revealed that when she was a little girl, who at an age when she probably wouldn't remember consciously, she had a guardian, like a nanny, called Bridie Murphy, and who told her old stories of Ireland and all. And if that's as accurate as I believe it is, that explained the whole thing. So there are all kinds of ways you can pick up these impressions, but I think the multiverse is certainly one of them. Shane, any further thoughts?
Sorry, you guys got it covered. You guys are definitely better on that topic than I am, so I enjoyed listening.
Okay, well, there you go. Thank you again, Charlie, for writing in.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to Facebook here, and our dear listener Peter in Bogota, Colombia, has sent in some questions.
Would not be a show without Peter.
He's becoming indispensable.
Yes. So Peter writes to us. Question, Paul, I understand you have researched the Stella Lansing case. Can you please tell us about this case and any similar cases?
Okay, well, Stella Lansing was, and actually he changed his question when he wrote. He wanted to talk about Ted Sirois, which we also have. But just briefly, Stella Lansing was was a woman who was from New England here. She was from central Massachusetts, and she lived until 2012. And she was very active in the 60s and 70s, and she would purportedly be able to take photographs with an ordinary camera of her backyard or of the sky or whatever, and all these strange things would come out. People who weren't in the photograph, all kinds of strange craft in the sky, things of this kind. Now, I did not know her. There's no excuse for that, because if she was active while we were on the air in our early years, so we should have been in touch. But she supposedly was legitimate, and that's really all I know. And of course, the question arises: what was she taking pictures of? And from our point of view, it might have been sort of a multiverse scenes, things of this kind. Shane, you know a little bit about this, right?
Yeah, a little bit, but. Normally, I don't speak 100% on any topic unless I've thoroughly investigated and researched it.
Good idea.
Hands-on, you know.
Yeah.
And so whether I do know of the stories and everything behind it, I have never really tried to recreate that, using the thoughts into the camera lens and that type of thing. But I have seen thoughts projected outwardly that come appear or happen within an environment, but we associate that with basically usually like parasites taking on this thought that you created, just to get your attention and get you to buy into it or whatever. But so it really kind of like a different thing, but that being projected outwardly has, a result in some sort. So I won't say that, I believe that there could be something to that. I just haven't actually, tried to recreate it myself.
Yeah, I've seen some of the photographs, but I agree with you, Shane. I didn't know her. I never worked with her, and therefore I don't want to, I'll just share what I know, and that's about it. So, then does Peter have a further question?
He does. Yes. Well, then he brings up, Paul, I understand that you knew the famous Ted Sirois. Please tell us about him and what you discovered.
Okay, well, the background of this was that Ted Sirois was a fellow who purportedly could look into a camera or even at a pack of film, which I saw him do. and it would come out either with a photograph or more often black Polaroid cameras. Okay. Now, the background of this is that when I attended St. Vladimir's Seminary just outside New York City, I had corresponded and became friendly with Dr. Montague Ullman, who was involved in the American Society for Psychical Research, and he was the founder of the Dream Laboratory. I think it was the first dream laboratory of its kind at the Maimonides Medical Center in New York. And I wouldn't really call him a mentor, but we kind of enjoyed each other's company now and then. And when something was going on that he thought I'd be interested in, he'd get in touch and say, you want to come down to the city and check it out. And on 2 occasions, he'd come on down and check out Ted Sirois, right? Now, Ted was most active in the 60s, and now we're talking about the 70s here, but he did kind of back off when there was some controversy, and a famous magician said he was a fake and all this. Now, Ted was an interesting fellow. He worked at a hotel in Chicago, and we'll just say he wasn't the manager. Okay, he ran the elevator. He was a bellhopper. He did this, that, or the other thing, and he was not a well-educated person. He had a drinking problem. He swore like a sailor, and he was well known to the police. But I think there's a principle we all need to bear in mind, that just because someone is, crazy or even stupid doesn't mean they're wrong. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not saying he was either one, but he was a salt of the earth kind of guy. Anyway, he came to New York twice while I was at St. Vlad's, and Monty, said, come on down, see him if you can. I did. So they were, it was at Maimonides, and there were a couple of experiments that I watched him do. Now, he used to take the black wrappings from the Polaroid camera. I don't know if anybody as old as I am can, out there will remember the Polaroid cameras. I guess they're still around. And they were spectacular for their time because you could take a picture and you'd get it right away instead of having to take it to the pharmacy and have it developed. Mm. And it would come right out, and it would, be sometimes not half bad. So he would wrap up this black paper and look through it. And of course, the accusation was immediately that he was had a negative in there of a photo, and somehow the light got onto the camera. Now, I never saw any photos when he was experimenting when I was there, but it would come out black on several occasions, and that's what I saw him do, which in itself is very, very strange. It means there had to be a pretty powerful energy source, light source or energy source of some kind that went in there. And he was really, really concentrating. His face would get all tight, and he'd look. And but I have seen photographs. He worked with a psychologist named Eisenbud, who himself has come under some question, and supposedly who verified that these things were that he could really do this. Now, what interested me was that when he would produce photographs, they would very often be of scenes that you could look up. For example, Eisenbud's property at one point came up, and then there was, but the barn was different than it was if you were to visit it yourself. There were a number of photographs where things were different from the actual scenes as they existed in our world. One particularly that stood out was, for some reason, out came a Canadian, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They have an air division, still do, and they have helicopters and stuff for search and rescue and all. And Canadian was spelled wrong on the sign. Now, what is that? Who would even think of that? So, looking back on that, I wonder are we dealing with a parallel reality thing, such as Stella Lansing might have created. So I don't know, but so I say I knew Ted simply because we rubbed elbows twice there in New York, and we talked, and I was a little confused about who I was at that point. But that's really all I know. I really can't say whether he was legitimate or not. He did take this on the road for a while and made some money with it, I guess. But he had been interested in hypnotism back when he worked at the hotel, and this kind of got him into this. He figured he could do this. Now, the term thoughtography is used here, but contrary to popular belief, Ted did not invent that term. It was invented in the early 20th century by a Japanese researcher who kind of discovered it, supposedly. So that's, I don't know what else I can tell you about Ted Sirois, but he was really a fascinating character. And I don't know whether he could do this or not, but I saw some stuff that really intrigued me. Multiverse perspective, yeah.
You know, it brings up an interesting question, right? Because if a scene is different, it makes one wonder if it's just how he perceived the scene,
yeah,
or if it's because essentially art, right? Art is perception. How the artist sees the world is how whatever the art piece comes out, and or it's the same with interpersonal reactions, right? You know, one thing that always kind of throws me through a loop is that every person you meet has a different perception of you than how you perceive yourself.
Yes.
So effectively,
that can be disconcerting.
Right. So effectively, there's hundreds of thousands of different versions of perceived versions of yourself in different people's minds.
Yeah.
And that's pretty crazy. And it's like, and nobody ever really knows the true story, maybe not even yourself. And if that's the case, right? Maybe he was he wasn't an educated guy, right? Maybe he just didn't know how to spell Canada.
Maybe not.
And so when he perceived it, perhaps that's how it got there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember this. It was Canadian, as in Royal Canadian Mounted Police. With like CAIN. I'd have to look it up, but it was all wrong.
No A, just Candian.
Yeah, CAINAIAD, something like that.
That doesn't mean it's not a multiverse thing, but I mean, in effect, it could be, right? Because it's how we perceive the world.
Eisenbud, the guy the psychologist who worked with him, just brought himself in because he thought it was probably another planet. I mean, that's kind of a reach, I think, in any circumstance. But this guy. But here we are saying, we're dealing with parallel worlds, maybe.
It could be. It could be.
Yeah, so who knows?
Or maybe it's how he perceives the parallel world.
Shane, have you ever run into anything like that? You have had a lot of cases, negative and otherwise, sort of rubbing elbows with things like that might not seem to quite jive with what's in our world. I mean, we all do that in this group, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen photos come out of, homes I've investigated that, take and have, an overlap of a different time period of that, of that environment in the house in which the picture was taken, or of, you've seen them, dead animals, animals that were dead, that were alive in the photo, things of that nature. But, I haven't really heard a lot about the gentleman we're talking about. So initially, if I was to be told this by anybody else, I would be very, very suspicious, and I would have to go and research it, and expecting to be able to debunk it. But talking with you guys and our angles, and I would have to agree with if I'm going to try to give it any credibility, it would be the exact direction that you guys took, exactly just how Ben explained it too. I mean, that would be the only direction that I would go to try to give it credibility. But otherwise, initially I was a little suspicious of this guy.
Yeah. I mean, I was too. And again, I give it no credibility one way or the other. I mean, he might have been legitimate, he might not. I didn't really know enough about it at the time. Again, I was in my 20s. So, not.
I will say one thing.
Yeah.
His last name is, the way you pronounce it is exactly how a lot of people pronounce my last name, which is totally wrong.
Uh-oh.
I just thought I'd throw that in there because it's a Shane Sirois. It's like, no.
Check your camera, look into the lens, see what happens.
Yeah, right?
All right, so very good. Thank you for the question, Peter.
Well, he has another one.
Another one.
He has another one, and it is for Shane this time.
Ah.
Yes, and so he writes and asks Shane, in your close encounters with Greys, have you discovered any clues to their specific source or ultimate objectives? And if it is about taking reproductive material, to what end? And if they're hybrids, for what purpose? Does it all add up to Dr. Jacobs' hypothesis, or what? Additionally, do you have any memory of being inside a UFO? And if so, can you give a description?
They're just trying to clone Ted Sirois.
Yeah, really.
No prolonged memory of inside a ship. I have like spotted memory that it's real cloudy, so I can't say for sure. I mean, that could have been from dream, but the ones that I definitely recall while being awake as being 100%. Never no reproductive stuff with me. No probing, if you know what I mean, with me. One of the last interactions I had, one was when I wanted to reach for my gun and I broke out of the paralysis. My gun went flying through the room, but the other one, the last ones that I had was going into paralysis, being awake, and then all of a sudden, boom, paralysis hit. I know they're here, they're here again, and all of a sudden I felt like someone was sticking long needles into the sides of my rib cage on either side, kind of like towards my back, but kind of diagonally going in towards the front of me, and it hurt, and when I woke up in the morning, I did have puncture wounds, and then within a day or two, I had bruising, and I do have photos of that. So things like that, but it's sometimes my memory feels like, in a way that they've kind of guided me at certain times, but other times, those interactions feel exactly like, the parasitic entities that I deal with. It has that same energy. Or I should say, not emanating from them so much, the environment. The environment changes, so when you're in an area and these parasites come in, and I know you guys will agree, that all of a sudden, before anything really heavy starts to happen, the environment changes. Something happens to the environment that changes, and you can feel it. It's like I feel like a vibration or a buzzing, and everything kind of goes dead, really, silent, and then things start happening. Well, prior to these things coming through, whether I get hit with paralysis or whatever, or I see the shadows or I see them and then I black out, the environment changes first. That's when I know, that's when my internal dialogue goes to, they're here again, and then boom, paralysis or I black out or whatever. So that's about, as far, but yeah, no, I don't have any memory of being on any ships, just spotted things, which may have, something to do with it, but I can't say for sure. But the other interactions, I know there's something to that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but as far as any agenda, I don't know, because like I said, sometimes it feels like they've kind of like guided me towards things, like towards doing the work that I do. But at other times, I'm not too sure. Other times, it doesn't feel that way. Other times, it's a little bit more aggressive.
Well, as we always say, people think that because of my seminary background, I assume that the aliens are actually parasites. But actually, it's just the opposite. I suspect the parasites were actually aliens in a broad sense of the term. So we've talked about that a lot. So who's next, Ben?
We have Doug from Texas with that's not so much a question, but it's interesting. And he writes to us, in light of your broadcast with Dave Kane, I thought I'd share my own 41 experience.
Yeah, that was last week's show with Dave Kane, yeah.
Yeah, and so he continues, while inspecting some wells, I happened upon well 41 while listening to an open-line show of Behind the Paranormal. Oh, nice. I hope it helps you concentrate. At that moment...
Fall into the well.
Yeah, really falling down the rabbit hole there. At that moment, Paul mentioned the 41 Signs of Hope phenomena. It gets even more weird when I check the total gallons that well 41 had produced, which happened to have 941 in total. Another day, I was listening to your broadcast and the subject of 41 came up. This time, I just happened to be looking at some chemicals that I use for my job, and the part number was 0941. When these synchronicities occurred, I just happened to be going through a difficult time. Nevertheless, they served to remind me that things will get better, and they certainly did.
Well, that's a nice thought at the end. Yeah,
it's very, very positive.
Yeah, just again a little bit of background. If you didn't hear last week's show, Dave Kane is a New England author and broadcaster whose son was the youngest victim of the station a nightclub fire in Rhode Island in 2003 in which 100 people lost their lives. It's just awful. It affected all of us here, Rhode Island being so small, and New England even. And so he immediately, and his family immediately, believed they were receiving communications from Nicky, the boy, by means of the number 41. And all his life, the number 41 or 941 also had been significant to him. All sorts of synchronicities from that. And so that's the background of this. And whenever we talk about it, I mean, stuff started to happen to me because our family media company published the book, 41 Signs of Hope. And I edited it myself. It came out to 41 chapters, totally unplanned that way. And, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can listen to last week's show. It's on the iTunes and all. So, anyway, that's what that's about. So everywhere I go, I hear people who know about this story talk about the number 41. And as we said last week, if you're aware of a certain number, if you're concentrating on a certain number, yeah, you're going to see the number. But I mean, but the sheer volume of examples of this, I think, goes way beyond any statistical probability of that kind. So anyway, it's really one of the most unusual things I've ever seen in 50 years of this.
Yeah, I agree.
Shane, any thoughts on numerology or any kind of numbers like that? I know that everybody has kind of a special number.
Yeah, I mean, like I've said before, like prior to 9/11, after 9/11, every time I look at the clock, it seems like it's 9/11. How many times a day do I look at the clock? But I will say
twice at least if you see 9/11.
Yeah, well, I look at the clock quite a bit. I think we all do, and no time's going to stand out unless it has a significance to that number, like 9/11. So it seems like every day I look, it's 9/11, and so you can associate that with something weird, or is it just because it's a significant number? But at the same time, we see numbers popping up in horrible parasitic type cases too, where the people that are being attacked are waking up at a certain time, or throughout their life there's this certain number. And we know how parasites work. This is on a different angle than what they were just talking about. But like say in the cases of parasitic type hauntings, they're going to try to get in your internal dialogue any which way they can. So if they can wake you up at a certain time with a certain number, that means a significant thing to get in your head. That's how they operate. But I do think that there is something to the numerology and all that within all this stuff for sure.
Okay, yeah. We've only done, I think, one whole show on numerology in all these years.
I think you're correct.
With Glynis McCants.
Yes.
Maybe we should get her back. She was very good, I thought. That was we're talking about 2011 or 2010 sometime we did that.
Hey, we're bringing back old guests and that we haven't had on in 5 or 6 years. Might as well, right?
Yeah. So it's an interesting subject.
I do believe it is time for our break.
Oh, you're right. I'm so fascinated by this. Yeah, we're a little late. Mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM with our special guest host Shane Sirois today and our open line show with some great questions. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade. The finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on ON Radio. And with our special guest co-host, Shane Sirois. And we are doing an open line show today. And Ben, what is our next question?
Whoa, well, we have a question from Thomas in Somerset, England. And he writes to us, I would love to hear Shane talk more about his methods in negative ghost cases. I've heard from several sources that he has a great success rate in helping people. Back engineering a case is really fascinating, but can't that backfire? How does he prevent that from happening? I guess there's a couple more questions in here. Do you want to take them one at a time, Shane?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the best story in case this person hasn't heard the story, but I know a lot of listeners have, but I just like the story because it paints a good picture, and it also is a case that I met Paul on. So, but I'll run through that briefly. So, kind of how it works is this gentleman was being attacked in Rhode Island, and, horrible things being hit, things being thrown at him, seeing this figure rise up to the corner of his bedroom, waking up to a disfigured woman's face inches from his as he laid on his back, and, things of that nature. And, he asked if I would join forces with Paul. We didn't know each other at the time. I said, as long as, Paul doesn't mind. And sure enough, he didn't. So we joined forces. So we basically, when it came down to it, we gathered information and everything, and spent a little time in there and spent time with him. But, basically it came down to, how long have you lived here? My girlfriend's lived here for 11 years. I've lived here for 6 years. Excuse me. How long have you been being attacked? Only the last 2 years. So what happened 2 years ago that, kind of lowered your emotional state of being or hurt this environment in some way? But generally what happens is something life altering that really, puts somebody in a vulnerable state of emotional being is how it works. And these cowardly, parasites come in, and they feed off of that, and they'll escalate it and keep you down, and so they can introduce the fear factor is what their ultimate goal. So what we had to do was try to basically change his internal dialogue, so change his thinking, so we can change his frequency and kind of break that connection, if you will. I like to just kind of say it's like two walkie-talkies on different frequencies. So when you're in a lowered emotional state of being, you're kind of connected to these things. You raise your emotional state of being, those two things can no longer kind of interact with each other or communicate. And so we had to elevate his emotional state of being, change his internal dialogue from negative, because he was a Vietnam veteran who's seen his friends blown up. Also, he was diagnosed with cancer, which is when all this started happening. So, when this started happening, 2 years ago when he was diagnosed with this. And so now he's at home thinking about how he's probably going to die, or he was terminal as far as we know, he told us. And also Vietnam vet and all the bad memories. So he's sitting at home just stewing in all of this. And, this parasite comes in because he's in a bad place. So, do something positive, change your thinking, do something physical, so you have no choice but to focus on that positive action. And so he volunteered at the soup kitchen, led this fight to save this stone church that was going to be torn down, which was the same church where this soup kitchen was at. And so he was on the news, he was in the paper and all this other stuff. So he had something positive that was driving him away from those negative thoughts. And so not only did the entity just disappear, his cancer disappeared as well around the same time. And so that's kind of how it works. And as far as the cancer thing goes, that's not the first case that I've done, or the only case that I've done where the cancer and the entity disappeared at the same time. They came at the same time and they left at the same time, with just left doctors astounded. So, but as far as what was the second part of that question?
So the second part of the question was, well, there's a couple of parts. You actually already answered one of them, which was how does he prevent it from happening again? Do you ever have cases of things backfiring?
No, not once. I think if somebody used this approach and didn't really have a good understanding of psychology, or have a good good people skills, and because you really have to have that just to have a set of tools, but you need to know how to use them thoroughly and know exactly how each moving part works. So and that's how I approach all this work. And so if I go into a home, I have to know how bad wiring affects the human brain. I have to know all those things. I have to know how mold might affect our hallucinate and all this other stuff. I have to know every little piece of possibility in this case. And so that because we could be basically treating something the wrong way, treating it as paranormal, when really it could be a medical issue. So I'm pretty thorough in all of this. So when you do treat somebody, and basically most of these parasitic cases come down to identifying what changed somebody's life in a traumatic way or dramatic way, pinpointing what that is and helping them through that. So if a person can't or doesn't know how to do that, then it could backfire. But it never has for me. So the most important thing is to help that person identify for themselves the issue, because a lot of times these people are in denial of their true issue. So talking with them, letting them open up, and sometimes they discover on their own, wait a minute, this is what the problem is. And then so you help them, whether you direct them towards help or you help them with just letting them open up and talking about, and then making them realize they need to turn away from that and go on a more positive path. And sometimes that takes accepting those things that happened in the past. You don't have to always forgive, but you can accept. That way you can move on and move beyond it. And it's worked every time. So, but I would still caution any amateur from trying to use those tactics without thoroughly knowing a lot more than just, hey, be happy, because it's a little bit more than that when you're interfering in someone's or intervening in someone's issues.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because it's basically putting a Band-Aid over like something that requires stitches. I guess so. The last portion of the question, which you already kind of started to answer, which Thomas writes, I have heard Paul and Ben say that people usually have their minds made up about what is causing the problem. Sometimes having trouble accepting new ideas about the paranormal, which you already kind of brought up, right? It's even if they don't want to change their ideas and stuff, they've sort of, it sounds like they kind of come to the conclusion that, maybe this is more about my mental state than anything else, if I'm understanding correctly.
The biggest obstacle I have with using that tactic is because people know what they see on TV, in the movies and stuff, and what you read in books since you were kids, and how the typical approach to dealing with is commonly pursued, and normally that is through some kind of religious practice, and so well, I'm being attacked by something, let me call my priest, or let me get a shaman, or let me get a Wiccan, or whatever the case might be, and let's use paranormal to fight the paranormal. But really it's kind of not really dealing with the root cause of the issue, and you're just basically putting, you're not treating the problem itself. So what these things do, and the religion or those tactics will work if the person has 100% full faith that it's going to work, and it helps them to pull themselves out of that vulnerable, lowered emotional state and help them beyond their personal issue. But normally it only works for a short period of time. It won't sustain because people will revert back to their old issues eventually. So you have to actually identify that root cause and treat that root cause directly so it will sustain. And, when I started this work, it was, how come, I go in after hundreds of priests when it didn't work? It's because they're not really properly trained to deal with this stuff. They deal with the people, but they're not dealing with the true issue. And so I identified that a long time ago, and then to realize it's about us, and so when you, like I said, you identify that root, you help them through that, and it sustains and it goes away. And I think I got sidetracked there, but
no, it's all very relevant. Yeah.
No, I think that's actually answering the question. It may not seem like it, but it is.
Yeah.
Because the question in and of itself, as vague as it is, I think I see where Thomas is trying to go, and he's basically saying, it's how you work, Shane, and you have a really high success rate, and it's like, are there ever times where it doesn't work? And the methodology clearly works. It's because it's not focused on the phenomena itself. Yes, it's a part of the puzzle, it's definitely, it's a symptom, not a cause.
Well, we had that one case, so it's worked 100% of the time to the people that have allowed, to have listened to me and did what I asked and believed in what I said, and all the people I've helped have done so, except for in Poe. Remember this gentleman who, I don't know, gosh, it was like maybe 5 years ago or so that we were put in touch with by somebody else, and turns out this guy had other investigators in there who he harassed, and insulted and all this other stuff. And so when I went there and I was asking him questions and then I started to, give him direction. Now this guy was, he was an angry person, and he had some kind of rare kind of cancer, like blood cancer or some weird, and part Native American. So he said he burnt pounds and pounds and pounds of sage and everything to smudge his home, but yet he was still being attacked. So when he called me, he expected me to go in there and do the same thing. And I said, well, why would you expect me to do the same thing when you did it and it didn't work? I'm trying to tell you that's, we're not really treating the true cause. That stuff does work. It helps to purify and everything else like that. But you have something bigger going on here. You have something, worse. So we're going to identify what that is, and which I did do, but he couldn't see past his, his established belief system and the fact that we're going to do smudging and maybe dance around or whatever. But, and I'm not making light of that. It's great tradition and there's good stuff in that, but it wasn't going to help him. He had something much deeper. We needed to treat that emotional deep scar, and he just wasn't going to allow it. And so, what he started doing is he put insults on Paul's wall about me and him both, and started calling me in the middle of the night drunk. And I said, you know what? I can't help this. He was a wreck. And so, that's the only time that that technique didn't work. It's only because he never allowed it to be put in place.
Well, that brings up a really, this topic brings up an interesting question. I'm going to aim this over at you, Dad. So parapsychology, right? There's the idea that, the phenomena is a reflection of energy that's put out by, whoever, if I'm understanding the principles correctly, right?
Well, in poltergeist cases. Yeah.
Well, in poltergeist cases.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, how far off would this be from those traditional ideas of parapsychology?
Well, nothing is entirely wrong. I mean, there's always, I think, a hint of truth in a lot of these, in most of these ideas. The idea of the parapsychology was founded, I guess, by psychologists. Now, psychology has never been entirely accepted by mainstream science because, it's not. You can't do everything in the lab. You can't replicate stuff necessarily because it depends on personalities, and mainstream science doesn't like that. So to make matters worse, out comes parapsychology, and that founded in this country largely by the Rhines, Joseph B. Rhine and Louisa Rhine, who was one of my mentors, started this in the 1930s, and the British and the Society for Psychical Research had started this like in the 1800s. But the point being that they would try to make it fit the principles of science, and I've always thought that it's outside of science, the paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to, the supernormal, whatever term you want to use, because like when I was in the lab, the heaviest thing I ever saw moved was a pencil. This big psychic would come in and the pencil would roll, but only after a lot of concentration. Whereas when the weirdest things happen when you don't concentrate, when you don't think about it, and science has a problem with that, with not thinking. So, yeah, I mean, I think that what we're listening to Shane describe is very much in line with what we've seen, and in a way, really disagrees with parapsychology because we're dealing, we believe, with independent life forms, not things that are projected. On the other hand, you've got egregores and tulpas that do seem to be thought forms that either rings the dinner bell for parasites and they come and assume the role because they're very good at mimicking and assuming the role, or you really are calling in something from a parallel world, or you're actually creating something. I mean, I tend to favor the independent parasite theory because that's what I've seen, I believe. But it's always open for debate, and again, as we always say, today's paranormal is tomorrow's science.
Right. Well, the reason I bring it up is that whether we like it or not, someone's psychological, emotional state has to do with the phenomena itself, right? Because whether it's the cause or a side effect, something about the individuals involved in the case is both the key to the problem and the key to the solution. And I think that's kind of the parallel I was attempting to draw with parapsychology.
Yeah. Okay.
It may not be 100% correct, and we also could be not 100% correct either.
Oh, no. Probably not.
But the interesting thing that just kind of dawned on me, after having been involved with this for the last 15 years, is that, I guess, that does actually play a huge role, is we keep saying the individuals involved, but it's like, parapsychology was saying the same thing, although in different terms.
Okay, I think that you explained it better than I did. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right, so I think we have time for, and I promise we'll get to some of the longer questions in the next open line show. We never do because the short ones are too enticing. So we have one from Richard Eno, our cousin in Northern California, who was also an occasional guest co-host of the show, and our Northern California reporter.
Yes.
Relatively brief question. Okay.
Richard writes to us, we frequently hear about hauntings or parasites being a negative experience. There are examples of parasitic or haunting experiences that guide, or are there examples of parasitic or haunting experiences that guide or help people who experience it?
We'll throw that right at Shane.
Yeah, but very rare. More rare than you would think. So, but I will. I'll tell a story which will help explain my thought on that. So, there was one point I was called to a home. This is a long time ago, and it was just for validation from the family that they had something at their house. They knew it, but they wanted some kind of proof of it. They wanted somebody that was, that did this work and was, well known to kind of like back them up on that because their family thought they were cuckoo or whatever. And so basically, they had what they said was a friendly thing in the home. They would walk in a room, the light would turn on. They'd leave the room, the light would turn off. One time they got home from work or whatever, and they had forgotten their key and they couldn't get in, and so they backed up off the door and they're like, kind of put their hands in there. Oh, geez, and all of a sudden the door, they heard it unlock and the door cracked open. Things of that nature. So one day the mother was in the kind of like a big laundry closet with the washer and dryer going both, so she couldn't really hear anything with everything going on. She turns around and she sees her daughter sitting on her butt, kind of, with her knees up, and she's kind of, her arms were wrapped around her knees, but one of her legs were clearly broken. And so she said, what happened? She said, I fell out of the tree and the nice lady carried me. Oh, no, the mother asked, how'd you get in here then? Because her leg was clearly broken. She said, the nice lady brought me in. And so, but, the mother looked around, there was no lady at all to be found, and they weren't in an area where there was a lot of people or a lot of homes. And so, basically, we were able to validate there was definitely something going on there. There were natural elements present that helped the whole process of these things going on. And so it was definitely credible to me. So then years go by, and I'm talking, over 10 years or so, and I get a call from this house, and these people, and they're frantic. They're like, we need your help right away. Bad things are happening. We need help. So I got there as soon as I could, and as I pulled into the driveway, I realized that this house looks awful familiar. And I'm, wait a minute, this is the friendly house, although it's not friendly anymore. This house is just horrible, and it's ripping relationships apart, and people are being attacked, and it's going from one person to another, and The most it was affecting at the time was 2, but it was usually affecting one person and playing that person against the other. You know how that works, and so that's what was taking place. And the difference was the first time I was at the house, that family was warm and loving. Now I'm here, and the problem with the issue now is this family is dysfunctional, and there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of personal issues between people in this home, and it was basically kind of a little overcrowded too. It wasn't just a mother, father, and kids. It was like extended family, and it was horrific. And so you had this negative environment, and so my point is this environment or this area was conducive, and it had natural elements present that allow these things to cross over. One of the most strongest ones is rivers and streams. You've heard me say that before, water bodies, but more particularly rivers and streams. I find, just huge. It's a huge aiding factor, and so it had all that there, and the difference was the environment that was being maintained inside the home. So we do have the ability to dictate what comes through by the environment we maintain inside our home. And so this is another thing that I help to teach people, because sometimes I go to these homes and it's like, you got natural elements that are gonna allow these things to come through. So now it's up to you to dictate what comes through. Do you want happy things or do you want bad things? And so we need to change things inside your home, change in the way we interact, and bring in more love and stuff like that, positivity. And that changes the whole personality of what comes through 100%. So we draw that in. And so I hope that helps to explain that.
Yeah, no, that's good. We're coming up on our announcements here, but just very quickly, there's no time now, but at some point I'm going to tell the story, I think I did once on the air, of probably the weirdest haunting situation that was benign that I ever heard, and it took place in my town when I was a kid, East Hartford, Connecticut, and I knew the guy it happened to. So I'll repeat that sometime. We could, I guess, really remarkable kind of ghost story. We can actually tell one for a change.
Yeah, right.
All right. So let's take away our announcements.
Okie dokie. So organizers are forging bravely ahead with plans for an in-person New England Parafest on April 10th and 11th in Kittery, Maine. We plan to be there both days, but we will also do a live broadcast of this show from there on Sunday at noon. Then we're scheduled to speak that afternoon at 3:15. Other speakers will include Shane, right here along with us, Andy Kitt, Denise Stone, Nomar Slevik, the Connecticut Paranormal Research Team, Kristen Evans, Dave McCullough, Lynn Nickerson, Tom D'Agostino, and Paul Gillis. Is that how we pronounce it?
Gillis, yeah.
Gillis. For whatever I looked at it, and I was thinking Giles, and that's
it gets into demonology, quote unquote.
Yes. You can check that out.
Paul Gillis or Nathaniel?
Yeah. Paul Gillis.
Oh, there's
no!
Paul, okay.
Is there? I wonder if it is Nathaniel Gillis. He's been a guest on the show. He's pretty good.
I know. That's why I was like.
Oh, maybe it's a misprint.
It's Nathaniel Gillis.
You gotta fire this producer.
Please don't fire me. Check it out on Facebook, New England Parafest 2021.
All right, the amazing Valerie LaFaso, an empathic medium who is also a UFO researcher, has joined our stable of co-authors for our new book, Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies. Also contributing will be Shane, Alexander Petikoff. The book will also contain the best of our interviews over the years with the greatest researchers in the UFO field, as well as some of our own experiences. Look for the book release late this year.
And you can check out our current books, along with those of our co-hosts at our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can also find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us, along with 900-plus free recorded shows of our 12-plus years on the air, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts.
And the recorded shows, we have reloaded them after solving technical issues to BehindTheParanormal.com back to 2010. And we have to go back to 2008. We're getting there. If you can't find them there, you want to listen to them somewhere else, check out iTunes or any of the other major podcast platforms. Indeed. So what do you have? Shane, what's going on with you?
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot.
That's true for all of us.
I'm still working on getting the Rumble podcast up, and it's going to be more than just a podcast, but I'm still working on that, but hopefully coming up soon.
Great. What we got next week, Ben?
So next week, January 24th, we'll welcome the mother-stepdaughter ghost research team, Pam Nance and Ashley Field, based in the Carolinas. They use theories and methods that are based on the multiverse.
Yeah, I've had some fascinating conversations with them. Should be good. So we'll leave you today with a thought from that lovable 13th century Persian philosopher and theologian Rumi. Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Shane Sirois. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.